Well, hello everybody, and welcome to my show. My name is Jason DaCosta, and this is Consistent Preterism. Thank you for joining me today. Hope you all are doing well. Today I just wanted to talk about a few things. But before I did that, I wanted to chat a little bit about one of Matthew Simon's latest, I guess he's writing blogs now. I'm not sure if he gave up on his YouTube channel or what, but a friend had sent me one of the blogs that I guess he shared in the Facebook realm. And I couldn't really read it all. It was just painful, but it was called The End is Near, or The End is Coming. And it's kind of crazy and sad to see someone go from such clarity in the fulfilled view to acting as if all these passages and all these clear statements and everything that he once clung to when he was in the fulfilled view do not even exist anymore. It's not like he's saying, yes, they exist, and here's a logical reason why they don't mean what they mean. I mean, he's just all out ignoring these passages, for instance, like Matthew 16, 27, and 28, ignoring them. Jesus saying he's coming back before some standing there died. He just ignores these things. And some of the explanations that I read in that article were just mind-blowing and mind-numbing type stuff. He's, again, right back in futurism, pointing to events like 1948 and the return of Israelites from all over the world, and what else? 1967, the war. He's pointing to events. He's doing newspaper exegesis to figure out what the books of Revelation and what all these old ancient books are speaking of, when he knows darn well what they're speaking of, because he just taught it accurately just a few months ago. But this article really just screamed desperation, and it showed his frantic methods of interpreting the scriptures. Now that he knows what they actually are about, he's doing any and everything he can to make them say things that, quite frankly, that they just do not say. So I thought it was really disturbing, and it really just showed just how far off the wagon this guy has fallen. But anyways, back to the topic of today's audio, which I titled it Simple Formula, or Simple Formulas. The reason why I titled it that is because I like to share teachings and quick studies and do so using simple formulas. And I've been doing it that way for a while. I've always taught the Bible that way, because the Bible, for the most part, is a very complex and very deep and tons of details, and it's quite intimidating when you look at the size of it, the amount of information that it has, the amount of events that it covers, the different time spans, or time frames, the prophetic writings. I mean, it can really just be super intimidating, and that's probably why nobody knows what the heck they're doing with it. So what I like to do is I like to use simple formulas to sort of rule things in or rule things out. And I've done it that way in most of my teachings. I feel like that's part of the reason why they've been successful and why people have caught on and have gravitated towards some of the stuff that I've shared lately. And even in the beginning, when I was a futurist onto a full preterist and so on, I always used simple formulas. I would always say, okay, well, if this says this, clear as day, and if we go over to this portion and it's a little bit blurry, but it's pertaining to the same thing that portion A spoke of, then clearly we know that portion A should define what portion B is speaking of, right? In other words, if the subject and the content is the same in portion A and portion B, but portion A gives us much more insight into what's actually going on, or when it was going to take place, or the time frame, or who it involved, and portion B is a little shady or shaky on those details, well, we need to let portion A mold our understanding of portion B. Okay, that sort of thing. We have to work with what the Bible gives us, and we have to say, okay, well, if the Bible says this clear as day and lays it out there on a silver platter and says, here, ingest this clear piece of information, then we have to at least take that into consideration when we're looking at the same exact events or the same exact details, but maybe stated in a different way that is more confusing, right? We can't get swept away in the language and the prophetic nature of a lot of these writings and the symbolism or whatever the case may be. We can't forget what we see elsewhere when the passages are a lot more clear. All right, so these simple formulas have helped me out tremendously. And so today, what I want to do is I want to demonstrate one of these simple formulas for you, and I want to show you just how easy it is. And once you start getting good at this, and it takes time, obviously, but once you study and you can retain and grasp, retain is probably more important, because I know that for certain individuals in and around my life, they just admit that they can't retain a lot of the finer details in the narrative. So what that means is that they may be studying or reading a few chapters one day, and they might read everything and say, wow, that's good, I get it, but they end up forgetting it a few hours later, and so the next time that they're reading and say a different place in the Bible, they totally have already lost sight of what it was that they read before. So they're unable to intelligently connect the two places. So when they come to something, say in the book of Revelation, and they say, wow, that's confusing. Well, if they were able to retain and grasp and absorb what they had read 3 weeks earlier in the book of Matthew, they would come to Revelation and say, you know what? This is exactly what Jesus said in Matthew 24. This is the exact same event, just portrayed and defined a little bit differently. Okay, so a lot of people struggle with that, and I think that that's one of the main reasons why people just are very confused with this narrative. And so I want to take you to Colossians chapter 1, and I want to read something to you, and then I'm going to take you somewhere else, and I want to read something to you there, and I'm going to show you how we can clearly, without even looking at the book of Colossians beyond this little paragraph here, we can clearly see who this was written to. We can see who was in Colossae. We can see who these elect ones that Paul is writing to in Colossae are, and we can see what this was all about, right? By process of elimination and by a very simple formula. All right, so Colossians chapter 1, verse 9 says this. Paul's writing to these dispersed Israelites in Colossae, these elect ones, and he says, for this reason we also, since the day we heard it, do not cease to pray for you, and to ask that you may be filled with the knowledge of his will in all wisdom and spiritual understanding, that you may walk worthy of the Lord, fully pleasing him, being fruitful in every good work, and increasing in the knowledge of God, strengthened with all might, according to his glorious power, for all patience and long-suffering with joy, giving thanks to the Father who has qualified us to be partakers of the inheritance of the saints in the light. He has delivered us from the power of darkness and conveyed us into the kingdom of the Son of his love, in whom we have redemption, the forgiveness of sins. Okay, now some translations say, in whom we have redemption through his blood, the forgiveness of sins, and some translations omit through his blood, and they just say, in whom we have redemption, the forgiveness of sins. But that is the key portion that I want to focus on here for this simple formula that I'd like to present you with. And those of you who are longtime listeners, this is nothing really new. You know that I've used these examples many times. Perhaps I haven't linked them together like I'm about to do, but you get the gist. So this is more for the people who may still be considering, may not be sure, some of the newbies, who knows who's listening, right? But here it is. So Paul tells these ones that in Jesus they had redemption for the forgiveness of their sins, right? Well, a couple things, right? The main thing that I wanted to connect this to, and the main formula that I wanted to show, comes from Revelation chapter 14. Because here in Colossians chapter 1, Paul is writing to a group of individuals, the elect ones, the saints, and he's telling them that they have redemption in his blood for forgiveness of their sins. Well, if we go over to Revelation chapter 14 and we read something here, we're going to see something quite interesting. Revelation is obviously the book that kind of bounces all around and gives different views of what's going on. Here we have a fulfilled look at this entire gospel mission and who is being saved and sealed and redeemed. Okay, and as we look at this, we can read and find out exactly who is in focus here. It says in verse 1, "Then I looked, and behold, a Lamb standing on Mount Zion, and with him 144,000, having his Father's name written on their foreheads. And I heard a voice from heaven like the voice of many waters, and like the voice of loud thunder. And I heard the sound of harpists playing their harps." So John sees into heaven. He sees a group, 144,000, okay, standing, and with this name on their foreheads. Now, from before in Revelation, we know exactly who this is. It's the 12 tribes of Israel. 12,000 from each tribe. It's the Israelites. Who on earth is going to deny that? You'd be crazy to. So John's looking in, and he sees them, by the throne, and he hears a voice sounding like many waters. He hears harps playing. He hears musical sounds, right? So there's this music, this song coming from the throne room. This is all imagery. This is poetic, symbolic imagery, victorious imagery. After this mission is complete and all the elect are gathered in, this is what John is looking at now. They're in heaven, and he's hearing this singing, and he says, "They sang as it were," this is verse 3, "they sang as it were a new song before the throne, before the four living creatures and the elders." And look what he says. He says, "And no one could learn that song except for the 144,000 who were redeemed from the earth." No one could learn that song except for the 144,000 who were redeemed from the earth. Okay, now here's where the simple formula is going to come in to show us exactly who Paul is writing to when he wrote his letter to the Colossians. Here in Revelation 14, we are told explicitly that no one but the 144K, in other words, no one but the 12 tribes of Israel, in other words, no one but the Israelites could sing the redemption song. Keyword, redemption. No one but them could learn that song. No one but them had the right to sing that song, because John says these were the ones redeemed from the earth. But if we go over to Colossians chapter 1, we see something interesting, right? We'll read that again. He says, "Giving thanks to the Father," this is verse 12, "who has qualified us to be partakers of the inheritance of the saints in the light. He has delivered us from the power of darkness and conveyed us into the kingdom of the Son of his love, in whom we have redemption through his blood, the forgiveness of sins." Now, if Paul is telling these individuals in Colossae, these elect sheep, that they have redemption, that they found redemption through Christ's blood for the forgiveness of their sins and their trespasses, keyword, finding redemption, then who do you think these ones are? Well, let's go back to Revelation 14. Ready? "And no one but the 144,000 could learn the redemption song, because these were the ones redeemed from the earth." Well, common sense and logic would say that if that is the case, and John is accurate in saying that no one but the 12 tribes could sing about redemption, and remember, this is a final look into heaven at the end. This is not some starting point. This is the final picture when they're all saved. They're singing a victorious salvation song in heaven. Sounds like the voice of many waters. Sounds like the rushing of waters. There's harps playing. So John is looking at a finished product here. And he's saying that no one but the 144K could sing the redemption song. So when Paul tells the ones in Colossae that they had received redemption through Christ's blood, he is clearly showing that the ones to whom he is writing to are part of the 144,000, aka the 12 tribes of Israel. They have to be. Otherwise, John was wrong, and the Bible falls apart. Everybody says the Bible is inerrant. It's infallible. It's the Word of God. There's no mistakes. It's perfect, right? Well, in order for it to maintain its perfection, what I'm saying must be true. Okay, the ones being written to by Paul in Colossae have to be the 12 tribes of Israel. They have to be. Otherwise, Revelation 14 goes in the garbage. okay, because of what it says there. So that's an example of a simple formula. Now, you can even take that further and say, okay, well, in Colossians 1, it says, in certain translations, it says, in whom we have redemption through his blood. Well, through his blood is a pretty important and pretty common theme in the Bible, in the New Testament writings. So through his blood, if we go over to Hebrews chapter 9, verse 15, we can see something. It says that through Christ's blood, or Christ's blood paid for the sins committed under the first covenant. Christ's death and his blood was shed for sins committed under the first covenant. Hebrews 9:15. Okay, so clearly what that tells me about this portion again in Colossians 1 is that the ones to whom Paul is writing to, when he says they've received forgiveness through his blood, had to be part of the old covenant. They had to be under the law. Another simple formula to show who they were. And we can take that even further and look in other places in this very short letter to the Colossians and see things like Paul telling them they were dead in the trespasses, and being dead in the trespass of being uncircumcised in the flesh. In other words, they were guilty of violating the covenant commandment where they should have been circumcised in the flesh, but they were dead in that trespass. A trespass is a violation of a commandment. If God didn't declare that commandment to anyone but his people, then obviously these at one time were his people. They were alienated. They were lost sheep. They were prodigal sons being brought back. And that's the whole point of the story. So the simple formula can just go on and on and on, and you can just get into a habit of tying things together to rule out options. And that's been my process for basically the last 2.5 years. And progressively, I've built up a pretty airtight narrative, in my opinion, where if someone tries to, refute it, they're going to come up against a lot of scriptural proof for the contrary. So that's why most arguments fall flat on their face. And there hasn't been any person since this information has been going around that's been able to refute it. So that's really where I'm going to leave it today, folks. I just wanted to show you how the simple formula thing works. Again, there are so many endless examples of this. I could go on and on and on. And if you listen to my older videos, you'll see that this is basically all I do. I just rule out things by process of elimination and by using simple formulas. Anyways, if you enjoyed it, folks, I ask that you please give it a like-a-rooski. If you didn't, take a hike-a-rooski. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't. And have a great day, everybody. We'll catch you on that flip side. Take care. Bye-bye.